All right, for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Christy Mulkey, and I'm the workshop coordinator with 240 Tutoring. And I am live today in our Praxis study and test prep group, as I am every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, so that might vary a little bit depending on where you live, but to do live videos each week to help you prepare for your Praxis exam. The last few weeks, we've been working through the Praxis elementary education. We worked through all the math competencies or topics and their practice questions. And last week we started the science topics, and we're going to continue that this week and look at topic 2. So if you want to see any of those old videos from the past several weeks, you can look right here in this Facebook group. Just scroll down through the feed and you should find them. Or you can click on the video or media tab and see all the videos there. We also have them on our YouTube channel. So lots of places you can go back and get any videos you might have missed. But today we're going to get started on science. So I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can follow along. And I'm going to make this full screen so it's a little bit easier for you to see. And again, we are talking about Elementary Ed Science Subtest 5005, and this is topic 2. These videos are designed to be specific to your test, and they will cover your standards, and we're going to talk through strategy. I'm going to teach you some skills and content and provide some explanation. So let's start with the actual topic. Now, last week we looked at earth science. This week we're looking at life science. So if we look at life science and you watch last week's video, you'll notice that these down here, H through K, look very similar to what they did last week. And that is because in each of the 3 science topics, those statements, those little standards down there, are the same for each topic. So looking at that human endeavor, process, and career, science is inquiry, knowing how to use resources and research material, and then understanding the process of science, that exists in all 3 topics. Now, we're going to look today at these that are real specific to life science. So let's talk about these really quickly. This first one is understands the structure and functions of living systems. So those are your key words right there, living systems. So you're looking at living characteristics in cells, tissues, and organs, and life processes. Then part B is reproduction and heredity. So looking at all the things that have to do with the reproduction and heredity aspect of life science. So looking at chromosomes and DNA and all of that stuff, that's part of the standard. Then understands change over time in living things. So last week we talked about change over time in earth science, but this is change over time in living things. So looking at life cycles, mutations, adaptation, natural selection, all of those aspects. And then we have D, understands regulation and behavior. Those are keywords there. So what do living things do to regulate, and what are their behaviors like? So you're looking again at life cycles, responses to stimuli, controlling the internal environment. And then we have understands unity and diversity in life, adaptation and classification. And then understands interdependence of organisms. So looking at ecosystems, populations, and communities, and how all those organisms depend on each other. And then lastly, and this one's in there that sounds a little bit different, knows about personal health. So nutrition, communicable diseases, and substance abuse. So we're going to break these down and look at some practice questions to help you best prepare. So this first one is about regulation and behavior. So you heard me mention that in the last slide, but this question says, it's number 3. And by the way, all of these questions come from, hold on, my pen has decided to not cooperate. There we go. All of these questions come from the Praxis ETS website, the Praxis Study Companion, and it's the free and public questions that they put in those study materials. So you have access to these on the internet, and they give you the answers and an explanation. But sometimes the explanation, if you don't have enough background, can be confusing. So I'm going to try to do a little bit of teaching as we go to help you get some of that background knowledge. So number 3 says, which 3 of the following? So first of all, they even put it in all caps so you couldn't miss it. Which 3 of the following? This tells you I'm going to select 3 of the 4 answer choices. So you've got to figure out which 3 apply and which one does not. So don't just select 2. You will automatically miss this question. If it says which 3, you're going to select 3. Select 3, okay? Which 3 of the following ways in which mammals keep themselves warm in cold weather? Which of the 3 let me try that again. Which 3 of the following are ways in which mammals keep themselves warm in cold weather? So here's the idea behind this. It's the idea of homeostasis. Organisms work to remain in homeostasis, which is basically a fancy word for a relatively stable state, okay? Organisms need to remain in an ideal state for their biological processes to work, okay? So temperature, all kinds of things play into that homeostasis. Of course, this one's talking about temperature, keeping warm. So in a multicellular organism, organ systems interact with one another to correct imbalances in the systems and return to homeostasis, or that stable state. So your body systems, or an organism's different body systems, will make corrections. They interact with each other to try to correct any imbalance. When we get too hot, when we get too cold, when we haven't had enough food and we're feeling malnourished or we're dehydrated, the body systems will start to interact with one another and take steps to try to get us back to that stable state. So for example, in humans, we need to maintain a body temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. If we get too hot, our skin sweats to try to bring down that body temperature. If we get too cold, the muscles shiver to try to bring that body temperature up. So I kind of gave you some of the answers to this one. So if we're looking at mammals and we want to stay warm in cold weather, we want to stay warm, which of these would that mammal do? Well, shivering is actually making those muscles work. It's kind of like working out. The more movement you are, it raises your body temperature. If I'm sitting still, I can be more cold than if I'm up and moving and doing things. So that shivering creates that muscle movement that produces heat. So this would be something a mammal would do to stay warm in cold weather. Let's talk about perspiring. Perspiring actually helps the body cool, because as the body releases that sweat, energy is absorbed as the sweat evaporates, and it thus cools the body down. Okay, so perspiration, those two words are confusing. Apparently I'm tongue-tied today. Actually helps to cool the body off. Think about it. When it's cold outside, do we sweat? No, we sweat to stay cool in warm weather. All right, so this would not be one of those 3 answer choices. Fluffing out coat hair. So as we fluff out, or an organism fluffs out that coat hair, all right, a dog's coat hair is fluffed out, that actually creates insulation. And insulation holds heat in. So that fur acts as an insulator on that mammal and helps to hold the heat in. Same way of putting on like an insulating coat, a wool coat over you. It holds your body heat in. So this would be something a mammal would do to stay warm in cold weather. Contracting certain blood vessels. So the body systems will start to contract blood vessels to reduce blood flow to the extremities, and thus reducing heat loss, which is why when you're really cold outside, your fingers and toes all that gets cold first. The body is reducing the blood flow to those extremities to help hold the heat in internally. So this would be one of our 3 answer choices. Hopefully you didn't even have to read all this very carefully. You could just know that perspiring is not how we keep warm in cold weather. It's how we keep cool in hot weather. So once you take that out of the equation, you have your 3. So pretty straightforward, but this is one of those things about regulation and behavior you need to understand. All right, let's look at another question. Number 7, which of the following is the broadest category in the biological taxonomy? Now, taxa, that what you see at the beginning, taxonomic system, is how we group organisms. All right, so don't be thrown off by the word taxonomy. Biological, we're going to group those living organisms. So taxonomy is the science of classifying living things. All right, now this is usually shown as like an upside down triangle. Okay, so I'm going to draw this really big for you. If you Google biological taxonomy, all right, you'll see lots of images that look like this, okay? And it starts with broad categories, and then we look at more specific traits, and it narrows them down into a smaller category, and smaller, and smaller, and smaller, until we get down to the very smallest category, which is going to be species. What is that? Species. Now this, in case you're asked a historical question about it, it is the person who originally developed this idea was Carl Linnaeus. He was a Swedish botanist from the 1700s, and he really got specific in here about how do we classify living things. And he developed all but one of these. His classification system started with kingdom, and it went kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. We've actually added one more since Carl Linnaeus came up with this. And so we've added domain at the top. So I'm going to start, and at the very top, you actually have domain. All right. And then under there, you're going to have kingdom. And I'm just going to abbreviate for the sake of time. Under there, I'm going to write this one out because this word's not as familiar. Phylum, so it's P-H-Y-L-U-M. And then under that, we have class. And then under that, we have order. And then a little bit more specific, we have family. I'm just going to put fam for right now. And then I'm going to write these over to the side. We have genus. Oops, it's U-S. There's no I in there. And then species is the most specific form that we have, or the most specific classification. So in this list, which is the broadest category, you can see really easily that's going to be kingdom. Now, if you're like, oh my goodness, how am I ever going to remember all these words? I've got a mnemonic that may help you with this, okay? So are you ready to remember domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species? I'm going to write out the sentence for you to help you remember. All right, so dear King Philip came over for good soup. Now, I've heard this good supper too, but good soup works. All right, so if you can remember the sentence, dear King Philip came over for good soup. Domain, kingdom, just look at those first letters. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So there's your little mnemonic that will help you remember the classification system and the order that they go in. Just remember, it's that upside down triangle. So the largest one is domain. Dear King Philip came over for good soup. All right. Let's look at this one about heredity. Number 8 says some human traits are carried by genes on the Y chromosome. a man will transmit these to A, one half of his male offspring only, one half of his female offspring only, C, all of his male offspring, D, all of his female offspring. So here's what you need to know. Males have one X and one Y chromosome, okay? The X is passed to their female offspring, and the Y is only passed to the male offspring. So the males will pass their X chromosome to their female offspring and their Y chromosome to their male offspring. So if we look at this, the correct answer is a man, some human traits are carried by genes on the Y chromosome. A man will transmit these, the Y chromosome traits, to all of his male offspring, because the Y is transmitted to male offspring. So X female, Y is male. Hopefully you can remember that. X female, Y is male. Okay? So they pass, the male passes the Y to the male and the X to the female. All right? We can go a lot more in depth, but that would take much longer than we have here today. So if you remember that tidbit of information, you should be okay. All right, now the Praxis study companion only had 3 questions on life science. So I pulled a few more out of the 240 tutoring materials and tweaked them or adapted them a little bit so that we'd have a few more to work with here today that hit other parts of that life science topic. So this one's looking at ecosystems and food chains or webs. So it says, which of the following would be found at the bottom of a food chain in an ecosystem? So if we're looking at that typical food chain, you have something eats something else, which eats something else, which eats something else, and so on until you get to the bottom. Sometimes you see it shown as a web. This eats this, and this eats this. And so it'll look more like a big web. But here we're looking at the bottom of this food chain. So we're looking for what would go right here. Now, what's tricky about this is people will read this question and they'll think, well, in this list, nutrients is the smallest thing, so that's got to be the answer. That's a tricky question. Here's what you need to know. It says, which of the following will be found at the bottom of the food chain? In the food chain, they're going to be all living organisms. They're all going to be living organisms. Nutrients are inside of a living organism, but they are not alive themselves. So they cannot be part of the food chain. Everybody hear me on that. So a nutrient's very small and you're thinking, oh, that would be at the bottom, but it's not alive. It's not a living thing. It exists in a living thing. So this cannot be at the bottom of the food chain. I've seen so many students make mistakes like this because they're like, oh, that's the smallest thing on here. It's got to be at the bottom. Soil is another tricky thing. We think, oh, that's really small too. Well, soil is also not a living organism. All right. It exists around living organisms, but it itself is not living. Soil itself is not living. So it cannot be part of the food chain. Well, now we've got it narrowed down to 2 things. So we've got a 50-50 chance of getting it right. So let's talk about these. Insects. Now that's pretty small too. You're thinking, okay, that could be at the very bottom of the food chain. Can't think of many things an insect eats. Let's think about this carefully. Insects do feed off of other living organisms. They eat plants. They may eat other smaller insects, okay? So think about things that eat mosquitoes, all right? So insects are pretty far down, but they're not at the bottom. What's going to be at the bottom right here are plants. Plants are the lowest level in the food chain. In the food chain, the primary producers are always at the bottom. So the plants produce for all the other living things to consume. All right. The primary producers of any food chain are plants. So plants are always going to be at the bottom of that food chain. Always going to be at the bottom. If plants are an option for the bottom, that's going to be it. All right. Let's try one more. This one's on personal health. It says, which of the following is seriously tongue-tied today. Which of the following is not an example of a communicable disease? Now here you have to know what a communicable disease is. And a communicable disease is an illness that can be spread from one infected being to another. So if I get it, I can spread it to you. These diseases can be spread by contact with the infected person, a vector, or an infected food or water. So if I've got a communicable disease, I sneeze in my hand and then I touch the doorknob and then you touch the same doorknob and touch your face. Okay, so it's transmitted that way. It can be through direct contact where I touch you, or through food or water. If we share food or water, it can be passed that way. Communicable diseases range from mild to severe, so it has nothing to do with how dangerous are they. They can be mild, the common cold, all right? Or they can be very severe and life-threatening, all right? Also, the amount of time they last does not impact whether they're communicable or not. So they can be temporary. We get over it fairly quickly. Think about the 24-hour stomach bug that you get over pretty quickly, or they can be lifelong. You can actually contract something and have it for the rest of your life. And so what makes it communicable is not the length of time you have it, and it's not the severity. What makes it communicable is that it can be passed from one infected being to another, either from person-to-person contact through an object or through food or water. So let's look at these. Which one of these are communicable? Influenza. Can I get that, catch it from another person? Yes, that's a communicable disease. Diabetes. If diabetes were contagious, a lot more people would have diabetes. This is not passed from one person to another. So this is our answer. This is not an example of a communicable disease. Strep throat is passed from one person to another. Chickenpox is contagious. We can pass it from one person to another. So a communicable disease is, again, something that can be passed from one person to another. I've seen some tricky questions where it talks about severity or how long it lasts, making it communicable. That's not the case. What makes it communicable is it can be spread from one infected being to another. Okay, so remember that about your communicable diseases. Now, as I've said in our other videos, please take time to know your test format. You need to know total number of questions and about how many you need to get correct. One of the most common questions I get asked are, how many do I need to get right? Well, for Praxis, it varies from state to state. So it's determined by your state or agency. And if you have questions about that, just comment on this video and I can give you a link where you can go look and see what does your state or agency require. You need to know style of questions and time limits. We've looked at style of questions throughout these videos. You need to know on the science, all three topics are weighted equally. So you can't just be strong in life science and hope that counts more than the others or any other arrangement of those topics. You need to familiarize yourself with what the screen or system looks like. You can do some practice at this website right here. If you just get to ETS and practice, you'll see it. There's preparation materials that will help you see what the screen is going to look like. So when you go into test, you are well prepared. Practice not only answering questions, but your pacing. Make sure you're moving at a fast enough pace to get through your exam. Now, on things like science, where it's more content heavy, I said this last week and I'm going to say it again, it's very helpful to know terms and content and concepts. And one of the most helpful things you can do is create flashcards. If you are already a 240 Tutoring customer, if you're utilizing our paid resource, our study guide, you will see flashcards for every single topic. Those flashcards are key in your content-heavy subjects. So when we're talking about flashcards, those are going to be so important for social studies and science. You've got to know those terms. You've got to know what a communicable disease is. You've got to know what a chromosome is. You have to know, thinking about all these other topics in here, what heredity is. What is the classification system? What is taxonomy? You've got to know those terms. You're going to get very hung up in the questions about that content. So I can't recommend enough that you either use our flashcards or you create some. As you go, the terms you don't know, create your flashcards, look them up and learn those terms, because you're going to get hung up in questions in these content heavy subjects if you don't know those. Now, lastly, if you have not checked out our free resources, 240tutoring.com/resources, there you will find a free diagnostic test. You will also find a bunch of other resources, our ultimate guide and everything to help you with understanding how to prepare for this exam. We also have detailed study guides that you can purchase for this exam, and they will have instructional content, which includes written content and videos. They will have flashcards, so super important for science and social studies. There'll be practice quizzes by topic. So as you study a topic, you can take a quiz and assess, am I getting it or am I not? And then once you finish a whole subject, you can take a practice test and see where you stand and if you're prepared for that real test or not. All of the videos I'm doing here live are in our Facebook group. So just scroll down through the feed and this discussion feed, and you'll find all the videos we've done, or you can click on the media or our videos tab, and you'll find all our videos there. They're also on our YouTube channel, and we have a playlist for these videos. So go check them out on YouTube if you prefer to look that way. Now, if you have a question or comment, and you're watching this after this live video is ended, please go ahead and comment here. I do office hours every Wednesday in Facebook. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you're going to have to go check us out in our Facebook group. Right here in our Praxis study and test prep group, I do office hours every Wednesday, and I go through and try to answer questions and respond to comments on our videos. So if you're watching this later and you have a question or a thought, or you need my help in any way, post that and I will see it and I will reply. I hope this has helped you better prepare for your Praxis exam, and I wish you all the best. I will see you next week, and we will finish up science for Praxis elementary education. Thank you so much for your time. And again, Dr. Christy Mulkey with 240 Tutoring.